Welcome to the Culture Lab. I'm your host, Aga Bayer. This podcast helps you turn your company culture into rocket fuel for meaningful growth. It gives you the tools and inspiration to make work synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging. This is where we explore how to cultivate remarkable cultures that scale and evolve as our businesses grow and the world keeps on changing.
This thing that we were doing of designing and building and creating rituals is a fundamental need all around me. There has been very little developed around how to do that and how to do it well. And that's especially true in our secular lives. So, I often say rituals don't need to be spiritual, they just need to be special. And so that's a really important point, and I think part of the core practice and design technology that Ritualist is trying to bring into the world.
This episode is brought to you by CultureBrained, a one-of-a-kind accelerator program where culture leaders get hands-on support and guidance on how to reach their goals faster, especially now in this brave new world of remote and hybrid work. CultureBrained connects you with outstanding peers on the same journey, but also with world-class experts, including people you know from the show. And they all help you identify and implement new, better ways of creating a culture where people do their best work. Check it out at tinyurl.com/culturebrained. And no need to write it down. There's a link in the show notes. Hey friends, welcome to episode 109 of the Culture Lab podcast. If you are tuning in today, chances are you are on the hunt for ways to establish a strong and healthy company culture. Well, you're in luck because today's episode is all about utilizing one of the most underestimated approaches to cultivating a thriving company culture: rituals. Our guest today is Ezra Bookman, an internationally recognized experienced designer, artist, and facilitator who explores the transformational power of secular ritual. As Ezra shares in our conversation, rituals can be a powerful tool to create a sense of community, identity, and shared purpose. In this episode, we'll be diving into the role of rituals in building the shared identity and aligning with organizational values. Plus, we'll explore practical strategies and real-world examples of how companies have leveraged the power of rituals to create a dynamic and thriving work environment. So get ready to be inspired to design your own workplace rituals. Here is my conversation with Ezra Bookman.
Hi, I'm Ezra Bookman. I'm an artist and facilitator, and I'm a professional ritual designer, which I just think is like the coolest job title. So I think I'll just leave it at that.
It is the coolest job title, and I can't resist but ask immediately, how does one become a secular ritual designer? What was the journey that led you to where you are today?
Yeah. In short, it's the story of a lifetime, but really in short, my background is actually all in theater. From the time I was really little, wanted to be a performer and director. I went to school for theater, and pretty soon I got really interested in this intersection of arts and spirituality, and looking to all of our artistic practices having their roots in ritual and wanting to create work that was ultimately like spiritually transformative for both the artist and for the audience, and trying to explore ways of creating that kind of work, seeing most of the work around me as fairly sort of like just entertainment. So I went to South America, I had a research grant, I studied with some indigenous communities there. I ended up living abroad for a year. And then finally, I wound up as the artistic director of a experimental, artist-driven, everybody-friendly, God-optional pop-up Jewish community in New York called Lab Shul,
That
where
sounds so cool.
ultimately, what we were doing was creating new rituals every day, inspired by tradition, with a foot in the past and a foot squarely planted in the present,
Mm-hmm.
and in reinventing in every way what it means to create modern spiritual communities.
That sounds so cool. There's so many things that I would like to unpack in what you have just shared. But before we go there, I will put a pin in this and I want to rewind a little bit because there's one question that I ask all of our guests at the very beginning. And the question is about the early cultural influences that shaped you even before you get interested in theater. How did you grow up? What was your home like? And do you feel like it has an impact on who you are today?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think probably the two biggest cultural impacts on my life. One is I'm the youngest child of four boys. And I'm just the most stereotypical youngest child. And so it's hard to ignore that as a real distinct cultural influence. How that has shaped me is constantly looking at part of my nature is the heretic, right? Like always looking at how things are being done and wanting to do it differently. And I think that that's very much a youngest of four kind of thing of looking for ways of differentiating from what's happening around me. Quite logically, one of the core pieces of ritual is around differentiation, elevating from the norm, making something special.
Was that interest in ritual also your way of differentiating from how you grew up? Would you say that you grew up in an environment where there wasn't a lot of ritual in your daily life?
Not at all. Yeah. My dad is a rabbi. My mom was a Jewish educator. I grew up very much steeped in ritual. And, ritual was really important and fundamental to how I grew up. And also, both my parents were children of the 60s. My dad was a major hippie, and rabbi was not his clear career choice in the life that he led. And so the type of ritual that I was surrounded with was a very creative kind of ritual. I was always asking, what does this mean to me and to us as a family, as a person? Does this resonate with you? And if not, what does? And that creative impulse and creativity around our religious and spiritual upbringing is something that I've carried forward. And I think, I can see it through all the way into lab shul, where we were doing things very differently than my dad did, but the same through line of making meaning for the modern world.
I love that invitation. And I think it's so rare to have that so early in your life when your parents are going to ask you these questions, right? Like, what does that mean to you? Or what meaning do you want to make out of that? So it makes total sense to me that you would go on this path and get interested in that growing up in an environment like this. So going back to the story that you shared and how you became a secular ritual designer, you did mention the word spirituality a few times. How do you define spirituality and what does it mean to you?
It's hard because I think, in a sense, when you're looking at the spiritual, you're looking, at least for me, what is inherently beyond language. It's trying to describe something that is inherently indescribable. That's what makes it spiritual, is that it is bigger than you and beyond your normal experience. And it's true that you can find spirituality in the mundane and in the small and the tiny, but it's that quality that feels bigger than the moment, bigger than you. It's hard to describe, and I think that's the point. And sort of recognizing the limitations of this tool called language for describing often what is a somatic experience of the body.
Right.
I will say, as an important caveat, rituals are not inherently spiritual. And that was one of the major shifts in that story after being at Lab Shul and looking around and seeing this thing that we were doing of designing and building and creating rituals is a fundamental need all around me. There has been very little developed around how to do that and how to do it well. And that's especially true in our secular lives. So, I often say rituals don't need to be spiritual, they just need to be special. And so that's a really important point. And I think part of the core practice and design technology that Ritualist is trying to bring into the world.
I love that. And I think it's a really great jumping off point for our conversation and zooming in to the context of a company or a team, because this is definitely what I would like to explore with you. I feel that we often use certain words like habit, like tradition, or even a routine almost interchangeably with a ritual. And I'm sensing that these words are not the same. And as you said, it doesn't have to be spiritual, but it has to be special. So can you unpack that a little bit for us and talk about how are these things different and what is a ritual?
That's a great question. It's a big question. So stop me if I talk for too long. When I was preparing for this interview, I was listening to some of the past episodes, and there was the one collaboration that you did with Adam Grant. And he was talking very early on in the episode about this team that was like standing around and shaking and asking the universe to like send clients or something.
Yes, it was such a great story.
And I was thinking like,
Hilarious.
oh no, that's probably what most people think about when I say the word ritual, especially at a company. That's where their mind goes. That could be considered a ritual, but it's just not a very good one. And it's certainly embodying values that are toxic. And so the ritual itself is toxic. But, rituals, they don't need to be religious. They don't need to be spiritual. I think what I mean by special is that it's not candles. It's not robes. It's not crystals. Special is just different from what's normal. Special things mean more than what they do. When you look at habits, you're talking about automatic, repeated actions. It's the things that you don't really have to think much about. You just do them. Routines are similar, but they're more conscious. Conscious, repeated actions. You're aware of them. It takes some effort to do it. When I brush my teeth in the morning, I never have to think about that. I just do it. That's a habit. Making coffee in the morning, habit. I never think twice about it. Working out, totally routine. Every time I have to make a very conscious decision to do it. And I have to fight with 100 different voices in my head saying, no, you don't want to. But it's a conscious, repeated action. And rituals are these special, repeated actions. But they don't even have to be repeated. That's the beautiful thing about ritual. The first time you do something, it can still be considered a ritual.
That's really fascinating to me. And I'd love to help our listeners, I guess, to understand even more about what a ritual could be. So I have a question for you, because we have this thing at CultureBrained, my company. We do it every day. It happens at the end of the day. And basically the idea and the intention behind it is that we want to end the day on a positive note. And so we call this thing the win of the day. And I have no idea if it's a ritual or if it's a routine. It feels like it's probably a routine, but I want to ask you why. So basically what happens, just to really quickly describe it, when we log off for the day, we have a group chat and we post our win of the day in the group chat. So basically, what was the highlight of the day? What are we proud of or happy about? And that's basically it. So we share these wins. And then we'll say, whoa, that's amazing. Well done. Da, da, da. And that's how we end the day. Ritual or routine?
First of all, beautiful. Love it. Stealing it. Putting it in my book. The first thing that I say, I really encourage people to think not in a binary sort of way of like, yes, it is a ritual, or no, it's not a ritual, and it's either or. But think instead about a spectrum of ritualization. How effective is it as a ritual? What is the intention of the ritual and how effective is it at it? So, there's a lot of rituals out there. Probably all the listeners right now, there are rituals at your companies. They just might not be very good rituals.
Like that shaking thing. Yeah.
Right. It might not be very effective. And so there's 3 things that I would take a look at with this ritual. And it's really for you to tell me, actually, not me to tell you. So rituals are intentional, symbolic, and elevated. Intentional, symbolic, and elevated. So is there a clear purpose?
Yes.
Intentionality. What's the intention?
So the intention is to end the day on a positive note and also focus on what works rather than what doesn't work. Because obviously our days, just like anyone's, I suppose, are a roller coaster. of great things and shitty things happening. And so the intention is, let's end the day on a positive note. Let's focus on what we've done right and what worked. Because what we've noticed is that we kind of underplayed those things that we did well, and we blew the other things out of proportion. So it's almost like a balancing act to remind us that there's a lot of stuff that we've been successful at.
Beautiful. For anybody, there's a clear intention, clear purpose there. There's all sorts of other effects, I would imagine. Maybe it's part of the intention. Maybe it's just sort of secondary, but you're also ending the day together. Even though it's asynchronous, like you're all ending it doing the same action together. It's a way of building some kind of team cohesion, I would imagine, as well. For anybody following along at home, the question here that I ask is, why are you doing this? Key emphasis on the why. Why are you doing this? Then we get to symbolic. And the question here is, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Are you and your team? What does it mean to you? What does it mean to you beyond what it does? So functionally, you're typing in a thing into a chat box. What would it mean if this was taken away, if you stopped doing it? What would it mean to you if it was successful? What are the values that are connected, your personal values or the values of CultureBrained, that are embodied or expressed in this ritual?
I love this question. Thank you so much, because it's really helping me actually to think it through. I've never been through this exercise around this one. And I also want to say, I love how you change the emphasis. So from why are you doing it to why are you doing it? That's super helpful. To answer your question, in terms of values and how it connects with our values, we have 3 values: be bold, be kind, be curious. And when I think about how it connects to our values, to me, it's really clear that it helps us be bolder, because basically, again, it highlights how strong we are as a team, what we have already accomplished, and we can build on that foundation. I think when you have a strong foundation, it builds up people's confidence. You start believing in yourself more, both at an individual level, but also as a team. And so it helps us be bolder. I think it's a really kind thing, back to our second value, to do for others and for ourselves as well. And I think particularly at an individual level, because I think most of us, at least in our team, I'm noticing we are very self-critical. We set the bar really high. And so sometimes, quite often actually, it feels like it's never enough, I've never done enough. I've never been good enough. And so it's almost like this act of self-kindness where you say, no, actually, I have accomplished this and I'm proud of that. So that's how it links to kindness. And I think curiosity, there's an element of that there as well, which is, I'm curious what has been the highlight of your day. I guess we can also learn more from that. I think it's probably in that particular one, curiosity seems to me as the weakest link. And I'm now curious and wondering, how we could strengthen that link to strengthen the ritual or routine itself. So this is super helpful in terms of thinking about it. And why are we doing it? I think I partially answered this question. It's really that we've noticed that we focus too much on what still needs to happen, on what hasn't been done, on what's missing, rather than what we have already accomplished. So it's shifting that focus.
Fantastic. What I love about what's happening here is you created this thing, you've been doing this thing, and probably what I imagine is that as a good leader, there was some kind of implicit understanding of what you were doing and pointing towards these values. But also, this is maybe one of the first times that you've really reflected with this kind of clarity around it.
Yep, totally first time.
It's the dialogue that we have between the things that we do and our consciousness around it. There's a colleague of mine, Reverend Mateague, who talks about rituals like it's an action with intention and attention. Right? So just the more intention and the more attention that we can bring to these things, the more we take what is implicit and unsaid and bring it to the surface and make it tangible, the more we elevate it as special, because there's so much in our lives that we go through on autopilot. And I think we can all relate to this feeling of sameness, right? Where every day just feels the same over and over. And these little bumps and these little valleys, these little moments that could be highs, we don't end up feeling. We don't really get to feel the highest of those highs, and those little divots, those little moments of potential sadness or loss or grief, we're running away from them and we're not really feeling them. And ritual is an opportunity to really feel it. And also some of that flatlining where just every day is the same, which brings us to that last question, which is, why are you doing this, right? That's the elevated, that's the special. Of all the things that you could do, like, why this? And a great way to start is, okay, well, what's the norm and how are we differentiating from it? So how do most companies or most distributed teams end the day? Probably pretending to finish work and closing their computer and then getting a snack and then realizing there's one more email and then going back to it and doing that and then going and getting another snack and then being like, okay, wait, I should just do one more project and then going back to the computer. Like, that's the norm. And so there's no closure, and your ritual is differentiating from that. So in my perspective, yes, absolutely a ritual. Only in the way that that word is useful to you as a team, right? If that definition helps you elevate that moment, I'm thinking about when a new hire comes in, how do you talk about this moment? Or when someone leaves the team, well, what was it like to work at CultureBrained? Is this one of the stories that emerges of like, this really encapsulates the culture of what it meant to work there because it spoke directly to our values. It was unique and special to that place. And I didn't realize it at first, the first few times that I did it, but after a year of doing that, I'm so much more bolder about claiming and naming my successes. And there were days that it was difficult, but every day that we did it, I'm thinking about a colleague of mine at SY Partners who their team starts every meeting just by holding up a number 1 through 5 about how they're doing. And then they share for like 30 seconds, right? Simple, quick, easy check-in, probably doesn't blow your brain to hear about it. Maybe you do it as well. And here's how, from my perspective, it's a ritual and that it's important is because they do it even when they're in a rush. Even when they're slammed on a thing and they're behind schedule and they're like jamming in a meeting that's back-to-back 5 hours of meetings, they still do it. They still prioritize it and take time to do it. And I think that says so much about their culture and about when you ask about, okay, why are you doing this? And why are you doing this? What does it mean to them? Well, we're human before we're employees and colleagues. We're showing up with something. And by the way, that's in the room, whether we name it or not. And I think that's one of the most powerful things about ritual that I hope everyone listening to this takes with you is that rituals make the intangible tangible. And that's so necessary often at work where these implicit forces are there acting upon us, whether we like it or not. And so ritual as a special kind of time, a special kind of place, a special way of being with each other invites and allows people to express things that they wouldn't normally be able to express, feel things that they normally wouldn't be able to feel, connect with people in the deeper ways that they normally wouldn't be able to connect. And by doing so, metabolize these forces that are there anyway, so they stop working against you and start working for you.
I just love every single word that you said. I think it's also true. It rings incredibly true to me at a very intuitive level. I think for a lot of our listeners, everything that you've shared is quite intuitive. And yet, at least that's my experience, that when it comes to utilizing rituals in our daily work with our colleagues, we are a little bit sheepish about it. I don't know if you get the same vibe from teams that you work with, but well, there are some concerns, obviously, right? And I think stories like the one that this lady shared on Adam Grant's episode, where it just feels very cultish and crazy and completely out there. And you're thinking, oh my God, I don't want us to be that. And so basically we shy away from engaging in any kind of ritual. So I guess my question is, what are the common concerns that you hear and how do you address them to give people the space to do all these wonderful things that you talked about? So elevating experiences and creating a space where you can be intentional about what's really important for you and make the intangible tangible. Because, well, speaking of culture, right, which is intangible in itself, I really cannot think of a more powerful thing that you can do for your culture than to make the intangible tangible in small daily moments like that.
The question that I hear you asking is, why do people not do rituals? If they are this powerful thing,
right,
that has been utilized in every single culture, in every part of the world, through all of human history, as far back as our earliest ancestors. So if that's what ritual is, why do we have such a difficult time with it today in the modern world? And why is ritual left out of the conversation so frequently, right? You have a podcast all about culture at organizations, and this is the first time that we're talking about ritual.
This is the first time.
Right? Which is, to me at least, crazy because of their power and because there is no such thing as a healthy culture without ritual. So what gets in the way? That's a subject of a whole other podcast and a whole chapter of a book. But for me, honestly, the first thing that I see getting in the way is that, like, they're hard and they take effort, right? It takes effort to slow down. I often talk about rituals as friction, right? They actually help us slow down and be with what actually is in the moment. And there are billions upon billions of dollars being spent every day to keep us from doing that, to keep us in automatic and habitual and unconscious and distracted. That's what we're up against. And we're tired and we're overworked and we're burnt out. And so the thought of putting more effort into the all hands meeting is like, no, let me do what's easy. And what's easy is what's habitual. It's automatic.
And you do it on autopilot because, as you say, you don't need to expand any energy on doing it on autopilot versus being intentional about designing something that would help you slow down. And
our brains are wired for that, right? We have a part of our evolutionary biology that's looking for those habits to recognize them so that we can free up cognitive load for other things. That's a big thing, right? It's easier. I think a big thing that gets in the way is what Priya Parker talks about, like wanting to be a chill host, not wanting to call attention to you, feeling unsure whether you can ask people to do more than what is bare minimum, and wanting to be like normal, right? Like not wanting to be weird, wanting to fit in. That's such a driver. We all want to fit in. So I think that's in the room as well. And to your point of this fear of, there are so many examples that we have of ritual gone wrong. Ritual is ultimately a neutral tool, which surprises people that I say that because I fly the ritual flag so high, but it's a neutral tool. And with the wrong intention or with the wrong values, with the wrong why and a toxic you get really coercive, manipulative rituals. So people are fearful of that as well. And the main thing that I encourage people to do, first and foremost, get really clear on that why. Get really clear on that, and why are you doing this? By being able to name that not only for yourself, but for the people that you are working with. Make it clear and not arbitrary, not just like another corporate activity, but something that's connected to deeper purpose and to a wider meaning. And I think the second thing is, like I said earlier, to recognize like those things are in the room already. The only question is whether you're going to address them.
yeah,
Knowing that, for me, liberates me into being able to create rituals for cultures and teams.
So everyone who's listening to our conversation at this point, I'm assuming that there are very few skeptics who would think, right, do we need them? Is this really something that's going to be helpful? And so trying to channel our audience here, I think that people might be curious now, and I'm curious too, obviously, where do we even start? Like, okay, so we're sold on the power of rituals. We know as a company that we need some rituals to emphasize what's important for us, to slow down, to zoom in on the things that really deserve being highlighted, et cetera, et cetera. Where do you even start? And then what's the process? How does it happen? Because it seems, and I think it's one of the misconceptions around rituals, that we feel like, oh, really great rituals, they're hundreds or even thousands years old and they somehow emerged naturally. How would you speak to that? Where do we start, and is there a way to design a ritual that feels natural, sits well with people, and helps us bring our best selves and our culture to life?
It goes without saying that this is, the vast majority of what my work is, and so it can't be answered in a single sentence. It's so culture specific. Not only the rituals that you create, but how you create them in a small startup of 5 people and a 300-person company is completely different. Those differences really matter. First of all, I would really encourage people, as my colleague Casper de Kaal says, every tradition started as an innovation. Every tradition started as an innovation, right? There was a first time a ritual was performed.
I love it.
And it was still a ritual. So I really encourage you to know that this work is totally valid. You can create a new ritual at any moment. And by the way, you can only do it once and it's still a ritual. So don't get too bogged down with like, I have to create something that is so durable that it will last for the next 50 years. That will only get in the way, right? That'll shut down creativity.
I like that. It makes it a little bit less daunting when you think about it this way.
Yeah. Free yourself up and, say, let's try it for a month and see what we learn. Simultaneously, don't be so precious with the traditions that you already have that aren't serving you anymore. The traditions are malleable and change, and they must change. They must adapt. Even the rituals that we have today that we think are 2,000, 3,000 years old have been adapted and edited over the years again and again and again. That's the first thing. I think a great place to start for anybody listening is look first towards the transitions in your company, beginnings and endings. I think that's a great place to start when you're not sure where to even go looking. Any transition is inherently fraught emotionally, right? There's something that is being lost in the past, and there's something that is unknown about the future. At the same time,
it's such a natural place to start, right? Because as I've shared in our closing of the day ritual, it is a transition as well, right? Transition between, I suppose, the working day and then the rest of your day, transition between one day and another. We haven't thought about it this way, but it just came up naturally that we wanted to do it at that point in time. So totally makes sense to me.
beautiful. I love that. Yeah. You were clearly tapped into the impulse around that, which feels so natural because those transitional moments that you felt it in your body, like something can happen there.
Yeah.
We also pay attention the most in beginnings and endings. So it's a good place where people's attention are. I think that on the opposite side of loss is liberation, is freedom. There's something that's being let go of. And on the opposite side of anxiety, of the unknown, is also hope. So whether it's the beginning
And excitement.
and excitement, exactly. So whether it's the end of the day or the beginning of the day or the beginning of a meeting or end of a meeting or onboarding a new employee or an employee leaving, being fired or let it go, whether it's a leadership change, promotion, any of these moments of transition, I would start there. And again, I would ask those 3 questions. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And why are you doing this? This part, that's where it gets most complicated, or I shouldn't say complicated. There's the most opportunity for creativity. And that's, I would say, go on my website. I have a list called the Ritual Lines. There's sort of the 7 lenses to look at any meaningful experience.
We'll add it in the show notes as well for people, the link, so that they can go and check it out.
Great. Yeah. Free download. Those are helpful for looking at this part. But start doing research. What are the the stories of your company? What are the myths? What are the symbols that have existed already? I love this example from a company called Gusto, where the founder started in their living room. So it was a shoes-free environment when they were starting the company. And so when they launched the company, they had shoe-free offices, and every new employee got like a budget to buy slippers. At the front of the office, there's like socks, swag socks, for if you're visiting, you could put on some socks if you needed them. And, that has shifted and evolved as the company grew from 10 to 1,000. But those kind of mythic stories are often great examples of rich soil to till, to come up with the this.
Yeah, I guess that this is definitely a big question for people, because I can see how it's relatively straightforward to identify some of the important transitions in your employee journey or employee experience for your team, et cetera, et cetera. But then, of course, yes, the big question is, right, so what do we want to highlight here? What is important? What is the ritual that we want to introduce? Any more tips around how do you come up with it? You mentioned this link between rituals and values. I actually even read a quote from you somewhere that you said, ritual without values is hypocrisy. Ritual with harmful values is abuse. So I wonder, what's the link there? And would it be also a good jumping off point to think about this of why are you doing this?
Yeah, I think that the values question really comes in that second question, why are you doing this? And the you being the royal you, especially in a company, of why is your company doing this? Or why is your team doing this? What does it matter to you? So that's a great way of avoiding those pitfalls, and also grounding the ritual in something that feels bigger than just yourself. So it's not arbitrary. I think another example is to work ground up rather than top down, whether it's a team, a small team, or even in a larger company. If you are getting some volunteers who care about the culture, so that you're not creating in a vacuum, but creating ground up with the people who are really living these values and or are affected by them, and who have a sense of the observed behaviors that they see of whether these values are being exemplified or where there's hypocrisy. Yeah, I think that's the main advice. There's one other piece of advice that I would give, which is there's a lot of reasons why we do rituals. And interestingly, there's a lot of great science out there, especially emerging out of Harvard, from the behavioral science department in Harvard, studying the effects of rituals. And I could list some of those as well if you're interested. So sometimes that's really useful when you're pitching to you're like, I believe in rituals, but like my boss is not gonna go along with this, and they're not gonna listen to this whole podcast. So to say that, well, Harvard did a study that proved that rituals help create a sense of stable feeling of belonging and connection within groups of people. But I've really boiled it down to rituals help us zoom in, zoom out, express emotions, and embody our values. So that's another great jumping off point of like, where do I need to zoom in, disrupt the habitual, put some friction, slow down, and really be with what's happening in the moment. My computer password is deep breath, right? I don't do it every time, but I like typing it. It's a little conscious interruption in my day when I log.
Now I know your password.
I know, I really have to change it.
Thousands of people know your password.
I got to put some numbers or something on the other side of it. Where do we need to zoom out? Where do we need to connect to something bigger than ourselves, whether it's the mission, the vision, the values? Where is there emotion, whether highs or lows, that we want to give space for expression?
I really love that. One of the things that comes up for me as a ritual that unfortunately I cannot attribute it to the right company, because I've simply forgot, but I'll try to search for it and maybe put it in the show notes, is how, for example, you zoom out of conversations about, operations and stuff like that, and bring the customer into the conversation, especially when you talk about things that will affect your customer, will have an impact on customer experience, and so on and so forth. And the company had a little doll, I think it was a mascot, that basically represented their customer, and it was always sitting in a chair in the boardroom, right? So that there's a visual thing, and actually someone would stop or slow down the conversation. They had a name for the customer as well. It was like, okay, and so what do you think Bob would think about that change? I think it's one of those things, right? It's funny, it's quirky, it's there to help you, as you say, zoom out or zoom in into what's important. And it can be so transformational, because imagine the power of that if you're just about to make a decision that could have a hugely powerful impact on your customer's experience without thinking about the customer in that moment.
Yeah. At the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, they created a ritual called the Moment of Reverence. They were having issues actually in the OR with mistakes in the operating room. And they did a whole overhaul of all these OR procedures, all of which were really important, right? These are the tangible things that all need to happen. And they also created this ritual, which was that before beginning a surgery, the surgical team would stop for a moment of silence to appreciate the significance of what they were about to do together and consider the patient's humanity. And they would usually read a small bio of the person, their family and where they worked, etc., the people who depend on them. Small little moment, the whole team would do it together, and they saw it have this dramatic reduction of OR errors just because they brought in, well, right, they zoomed in, they disrupted the habitual, and they, like you said, brought in the humanity of this person in a really real and tangible way. So it wasn't just another object that they were working on, but a human being that they were working with.
Oh my gosh. My mom has recently been diagnosed with cancer, sadly, and we're going through the process of the healthcare, and it takes a while, of course. And I'm just thinking, oh my gosh, how powerful would that be if the people who interacted with her did that? Because it often felt like she was just a number and one of the thousands of people that they deal with. And of course, on us and our family, it has a huge impact, but no one seems to appreciate it.
I'm so sorry to hear about that diagnosis, and I'm really wishing you and your whole family and your mother health and strength and support and a lot of love through this process. I am sure it will be
Thank you.
a difficult journey. I have empathy for all of those medical professionals. They're people also. And like we were saying earlier, habitual is easy. Automatic is easy. And I have empathy for the ways in which the strategies that they've created to disconnect from ultimately what I imagine is the immensity and the difficulty of dealing with sickness every day. That's a lot to handle. And so they've created these kinds of separations so they don't actually have to feel that. And again, ritual, it's there anyway. And a ritual interruption, a little bit of friction lets that in. And that's scary. And that's more energy. And that's effort. But it's the full experience of life. And that's what we're missing out on. Whether we're at home or at work or in the hospital, we're missing out on the full experience of life. And that's the core of what I'm doing, what I want people to make space for.
Which brings us back, Ezra, to the beginning of our conversation where we talked about spirituality. And I was really curious where we end up by the end of our conversation and whether we will feel like there is space for spirituality in the workplace. Because I think if you ask someone who hasn't given it a lot of thought, probably the knee-jerk reaction would be definitely not. But when you think about it this way, and when you think about allowing people to live the full experience, right, of what it's like to be a part of a team, to be doing this work, to be a human being in the workplace. I think it is absolutely connecting people to something that is larger than them. And by your definition that you've mentioned earlier, it is bringing spirituality in the workplace in the most beautiful way. And I feel it's such important work because our time on this earth is finite. We have, I think, approximately 4,000 weeks or something like that. And we spend so much of that time at work. And if we don't experience life fully at work, or if we have really bad experiences at work, it has tremendous impact on people. So I hope that we've convinced our listeners that introducing rituals into the workplace has so much value on so many levels. I have a series of 5 questions. We call them rapid fire questions for you, Ezra. Before we shift gears, I want us to honor the conversation that we've had so far. Is there anything that you want to share to sort of wrap it up and move forward?
You opened up such a such a big thing there at the end. For me, I think that this question of spirituality in the workplace is more complex. I think that the word spirituality has a lot of baggage on it and means something different to a lot of different people. I could rattle off really quickly a couple examples of companies that have sort of brought in spirituality for disastrous effects. WeWork is one of the great examples of the sort of spiritual bypassing that can happen at the workplace when you bring in that language. And so for me personally, I'm very sort of at an arm's distance around spirituality. And yet at the same time, I recognize that spirituality is one lens that people have for interpreting those big feelings of meaning and purpose and belonging and connection and feeling seen and seeing others. And I want to really encourage and allow and celebrate that lens, and also recognize that it's only one lens of many to understand those experiences. And so I would sort of move people's eyes towards, instead of towards spirituality, towards those core experiences of belonging and purpose. That maybe would be the last thing that I would say.
Yeah, that's great. And as you said, it doesn't, definitely rituals and don't have to be spiritual.
Yeah.
They just need to be special. I think that's a really good way of wrapping up that part of our interview. So let's shift gears. I have 5 questions for you. The whole idea here is that it's really going to be rapid fire. So we'll try to answer all of these questions, 5 questions, in under 2 minutes. That's a challenge.
I will try my hardest.
Part of our mission is to make work synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging. And I want to ask, what is your number 1 tip to bring more of a sense of belonging into the workplace?
My number 1 tip is to form small groups, campfire experiences across teams where people can get together and be their authentic selves. Small groups, that's where belonging happens, is in the groups of really no more than 12, ideally around 6 to 8.
What are the signs, some red flags perhaps, that tell you that a company culture needs some work, or perhaps even a major overhaul?
Hypocrisy. Do leadership actions align with what they say? And what do employees say when their boss isn't listening?
Do you admire any companies for the culture? And if yes, why?
No. The truth of the matter is, I'm on the outside and you never really know what's on the inside. And the moment I answer is the moment when a big scandal breaks or massive layoffs happen on that company. So I'm going to go with no.
I know. Yeah, I know the feeling. What are the books that you would recommend to our listeners? And they don't necessarily need to be books on culture or leadership, but anything that you believe people should be aware of and read when they think about how do we create an environment where people can do their best work?
Yeah, the first book I would say is actually not a leadership book, because you're probably reading so much of that you need a break. And so I would actually recommend The Book of Delights by Ross Gay to refine your sensor for gratitude and awe and wonder in the world, that I think is like one of the best things that you can cultivate. You don't need someone to tell you how to do it. You just need to like experience Ross Gay's gorgeous prose and poetry around it. And it's easy to read.
Yeah, it's such a wonderful book. And you're actually the second guest who recommends it. The first
Oh my
one was
gosh.
Catherine Price. I don't know if you're familiar with her work. She's the lady who's written a book about fun. Yeah, she's recommended it too. It's a beautiful book.
That's amazing. One other book is just The Art of Community by Charles Vogel.
Yes.
It's a sort of textbook book that you should all have read at some point.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so final question. What is one thing that our listeners could do tomorrow to build their own culture lab, which is basically to experiment and start cultivating a sort of culture that will help them and their teams to bring their vision to life?
Sure. We talked a lot about this, but I would say take something that you're doing and create more intentionality around it. So why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? And why are we doing this? Those questions alone on something that you're already doing. You don't even have to invent something new, but just like, why are we beginning every Zoom meeting with like 5 minutes of idle chit chat while we wait for everyone to arrive? And then we like dive in sort of awkwardly. Why are we doing that? And why are we doing this? And of all the things that we could do to begin a meeting, why are we choosing to do this? Because it is a choice. So those 3 questions, I would say, is the number one thing that you can do.
I love these questions. Ezra, thank you so much for being our guest. It was such a pleasure. I'm eagerly awaiting the fireside chat in the CultureBrained community as well, where our members will have an opportunity to pick your brain about how to design powerful rituals in their companies. But for those of our listeners who don't have access to the community, they want to learn more about your work, what are the best places for them to visit, to learn from you or reach out to you?
Oh, thank you, Aga. It's been such a great conversation. I'm so eager to hear from you all who are listening, some feedback, ideas, questions. If you have a ritual at your company that you want to share with me, I collect them as a hobby and as a profession. So please share them with me. I'd love to hear your reactions and your thoughts. My email is ezra@ritualist.life, ritualist.life, and my website is ritualist.life. There's a ton of information. There's more podcasts. There's some articles I've written, and there's also a bunch of free downloads as well, including a ritual that I call Fresh Air, which is like a simple, quick, easy ritual that you can bring in for your distributed or virtual teams. That's the best way. I'm also obviously on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, all those things. I'm sure we'll link to those in the show notes.
We will. And one thing that I also want to say is that you have this amazing workshop for people who want to learn more about how to design rituals. I was hoping to be able to participate in it soon, but unfortunately the dates didn't work out for me. But I'm looking forward to the next one in the summer. So if people would be interested in diving deeper into the art of designing rituals, we will post a link to your waiting list for the next workshop as well.
Yes, the Ritual Lab. 7 weeks to design new ritual in your company or community, and to do it not alone. It's a small circles, groups of just cohorts of 6 where we do this work together. And so you leave not only with a new ritual and a deeper understanding, but also a group of 6 incredible professionals from around the world who share your passion and your love, and who you can count on and depend on for feedback and ideas in the future.
That's such a beautiful way of describing the power of community. And we do something similar with CultureBrained. And I'm always amazed with the quality of support people give each other and the generosity of spirit. It's wonderful to be able to observe that. So yes, absolutely. I think people, if you are interested in learning more, I would definitely consider joining one of these workshops that Ezra runs. One final question, Ezra. Do you have anyone in mind who you know would be an amazing guest on the show?
What a great question. I love being able to pass the love forward, and the list is so long, and I hope I don't forget anybody. But Carrie Melissa Jones is a fantastic writer on community and brand communities, and she's a powerhouse. Brandon Peele is an expert on purpose, finding your purpose at work as an organization, but also as an individual, and is a phenomenal speaker and a brilliant, beautiful soul. And also Bill Kahn. He's at the University of Boston Executive MBA program. He's an organizational psychologist and has written some great books, especially on like how to have difficult conversations. So, and I think it's just brilliant.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you so much. We'll definitely reach out to them and hopefully they say yes and we'll have them on the show. So once more, huge thanks for being here with us, sharing your knowledge and your experience so generously. I think it's the work that the world needs. Definitely company cultures need more intentional rituals. And so I'm really hoping that people will reach out, learn more, and most importantly, start implementing that knowledge in their companies.
Thank you, Aga.
Thanks, Ezra. I'm Aga Bayer, the creator and host of the Culture Lab podcast. And this is the Culture Lab team.
Anis Enlabarawi, production manager.
Sound producer, Heather McPherson, Twisted Spur Media.
Thank you for joining Ezra and me for this episode of the Culture Lab podcast. If you found any moments that were interesting, inspiring, or maybe even game-changing, please share this episode with someone who might appreciate it. After all, good ideas are meant to be shared. If you want to dive deeper into the topics that we discuss on the Culture Lab podcast, if you want to participate in one-of-a-kind Culture Accelerator program, if you want to join a global community of peers, you might want to check out the CultureBrained community. CultureBrained is for people who look for new ways of cultivating remarkable cultures in this brave new world of remote and hybrid work. If you are in charge of a culture-shaping initiative, and if you believe that work should be synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging, I think you will feel at home in the CultureBrained community. You can learn more about it at tinyurl.com/culturebrained, and you'll find the link in the show notes. And now, a quick preview of the upcoming episode. This time, my guest is Cameron Herold. Cameron is the mastermind behind hundreds of companies' exponential growth. He's also the author of 6 books, including The Vivid Vision, and the founder of the CEO Alliance, the world's leading network for seconds in command. He's also the host of the Second in Command, the Chief Behind the Chief podcast, where he interviews COOs and other seconds to share their insights with his listeners. In this snippet, Cameron talks about the importance of cultivating people-first culture.
If growing people becomes the last thing, it's because the team is so busy or so myopic on focusing on numbers that people feel burned out. If you want your employees to really stay with you and to care about the company, you have to care more about them first. You have to care about their fears, their insecurity, their home life, their relationships. They have to care about their health, about them as humans. And if they feel so cared for, they're going to go through brick walls for you to build the company.
Thanks again for tuning in. If you want to get free resources on cultivating a remarkable, powerful, and authentic company culture, especially in a business that scales, type this into your browser: agabayer.com/resources. If you haven't subscribed to the Culture Lab yet, please do it now. That's the best way you can support our work. And finally, we would be ever so grateful if you could rate and review our podcast on the platform that you listen to. Thank you, and you are amazing for listening to this point. Not many people do.